Welcome back to Tinygrams Games, and I'm here today to take a look at set 6.2 and give you my thoughts on what's going on here. So first up is my favorite card of the set, Remembrance. It feels like Remembrance has all kinds of cool tricks you can do with it. It's very flexible. There's all kinds of interesting plays you have with this. First off, you could try to make a really cool banishing deck. So you could play Tomb Pillager, Remembrance, Dire Hound. You're pillaging all the cards in your deck, you're banishing them, so you're going into player level 2, you have a smaller deck. You could play Killian with this, so that you could pull Killian out as the card you're banishing, level another card, so now you're going into player level 2, your deck is smaller, your cards are more leveled, and you're sort of on your way to sort of roll through on 2 and beyond. You could go another way, you could go more of an aggro route, and try to play guys that have really big level 1s and really big level 2s, and so that on level 1, you're able to pick and choose when you want this big level 1 that you're pulling out. And then going into level 2, you're able to go ahead and get these level 2s as well with Remembrance. And so you have all kinds of interesting plays you can make. And then you can even go beyond and try to do some really interesting shenanigans where on level 3 you go like play a level 2, play Remembrance, get what's now a level 3 out of your discard pile, stick it into play, and now you have this insane board right away on 3.1. So I feel like Remembrance gives you all kinds of different cool options of things you can do. I know for myself, the first couple builds I'll use will definitely have Dire Hound, they'll definitely have Death Weaver, they'll definitely have Echoes, trying to sort of get that loop going where I'm controlling the cards I'm banishing. And so I have a lot of decision points over like, do I want to banish something that I don't want to use in the future, or am I banishing something because I want to make it big right now? Do I want to have like an Ebon Skull Knight that's even bigger because I have 2 Death Weavers on the board? What exactly do I want to do? So I think it's a really cool card, it's an interesting card, and I think there's a lot of room to do some fun things with it and some really competitive plays. I do think we'll see it in the constructed metagame. I'm not sure how much. We'll have to see who can make the coolest, most broken deck with Remembrance. I know I'll be trying, and so stay tuned for my ideas, maybe Stoutmeister, some of the other top players. I'm sure someone will come up with something great. I think Sparky is the coolest looking of the new set, but I don't think he's very playable. If you look at Sparky, I feel like the power for Sparky is in getting like a level 2 on level 1 or getting a level 3 on level 2. I don't feel like the game is going to go long enough right now, especially with how fast it is, to be able to go all the way to where you have 2 level 3s on the board and you're making a Forge Guardian Omega. That just doesn't seem all that likely. It feels more like a fun card to me, like a challenge, right? Can I get out a bunch of Sparkies fast enough? I can do cool cards where I'm looping them with Echoes and I'm bringing them back with Shallow Grave, and I can do all these cool, fun mechanics. I'm just not sure it's worth it, right? Like there's some cards that it's worth doing all this cool shenanigans for to make them happen. I don't think the hoops you have to jump through to make Sparky work are really worth it. So he's one of these like funsies, interesting cards. I just don't think he's going to have an impact on the constructed metagame though. Ruby Scale Dragon is another interesting card. I feel like when you have a card like this where the level 1 doesn't do much for you, at least offensively, the level 2 and 3 have to be substantial. So for me, I would instantly compare it to Scorchmane Dragon. I would say, okay, Scorchmane Dragon just looks better. The downside on level 1 is not really that much worse. If the guy's going to have Defender 2-7 versus 0-5, not that big of a difference. So in most decks, I would think I would run the Scorchmane Dragon over a card like this. Now, what is interesting is we do have some cards that can benefit from having more health. So if you're trying to do some interesting deck where you're like trying to put out a bunch of high health guys and maintain your board presence that way, this could work pretty well because you could maintain your board presence in player level 1, get yourself into 2 and 3, and in player level 3, this dragon is pretty big and he makes everyone else a lot harder to kill. So that could be interesting. I also think maybe you could use this in a Wagyu deck. I haven't tried this yet, but anytime you're giving your creatures health, you're letting them hang on a little longer, you're giving yourself health, you're powering up Wagyu a bit. Maybe, just maybe, this is another threat in a Wagyu deck. I tend to think probably not because the level 1 is so weak. I'm not sure you can get away with playing this and doing everything you want to do with the Wagyu deck. So it's something I'll probably test at some point, but it's not a card I'm excited about. It's an interesting card. It fills a different design space. I like that about it. But as far as dominating the constructed metagame, I just don't think we're going to see Ruby Scales Dragon make a big impact. Phoenix Call is a very interesting card. I really don't know what to say about this card. It's a spell, so there's sort of pluses and minuses with that, right? You could get an Aetherphage to come and pull it out of your hand, so then you don't get your Phoenix. Or you could play it with something like Ice Grasp, where you're using it as a creature light deck, and so this fills a creature spot in a creature light deck. You could go like Dragon Wake and this card, and then you're getting creatures without having to play creatures, and you're triggering Ice Grasp. So that's kind of interesting. But the creature itself, I don't know. I tend to think he's not that great. A 3/6 that maybe does 3 damage to their face, maybe does 3 damage to a creature. It's like a Nether Shriek that doesn't kill things. And so it's, I don't know, anytime you have this sort of randomly coming into lanes and not having a dramatic impact, I'm not sure how much I like these cards, because if it's randomly coming in, you lose so much control over the strategy of where you're going to play stuff. And the Phoenixes just aren't that huge. It's not like they are amazingly huge for the bodies themselves. I mean, it's nice to be able to do on level 2 7 damage right to their face. And if you're running an Ice Grass deck and you get 7 more damage to the face, I could see this fitting into an Ice Grass deck. Outside of that, though, I'm not entirely sure where this card fits into the metagame. I don't see it having a dominant place in the constructed metagame. We might see it here and there. I definitely think we'll see people try it in Ice Grass decks. To be honest, I'm not sure that it fits, though. We'll have to see. Wipe Clean certainly changes the way you have to think about an Ice Grass deck, and I'm not sure Phoenix Call really fits all that well into this new deck. Maybe it does. Maybe it's just a card they're looking for. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to test it out as I continue my own testing of Ice Grass, but it certainly, I don't think it'll be a staple across the board by any means. All right, moving on to the heroics, we've got Wipe Clean. Wipe Clean is so interesting because in a vacuum, it's a pretty cool card. You can take away a lot of stuff. It's a good meta card. Anytime you have some strategy built around like Wagyu having breakthrough or one giant creature with 1,000,000 armor, it's nice to have a meta card like this. And so from that perspective, I think it's a really good card to have in the meta. But the problem is it also fits into a perception that a lot of people have of Solforge, which is design completely broken cards and then in the very next set have a hard counter to them or nerf them, so that you're sort of luring people into buying these cards when they're most expensive, and then you immediately counter them. And it's not a very elegant counter to Ice Grasp. It's pretty much just the hard counter in card form, which is always dicey. And so some people will look at this and they'll say, okay, so Ice Grasp was clearly overpowered. They released it anyway, and then now they've released a card that just completely neuters that card. I'm not sure that this is what's happening. I'm just saying this is a perception that some people are going to have. I will say that Wipe Clean makes Ice Grass decks really dangerous. I've been running them lately in queues, doing very well. But whenever you run into Wipe Clean, it's pretty dicey, right? So you've got all this invested in your Ice Grasp deck. They just take off your Ice Grasp, and then you pretty much lose. So in a vacuum, as a meta card, I think it's great. As what looks to be a direct reaction to Ice Grasp, I really don't like this type of reaction. But as a card itself, I think it's a good card to have in the meta. I'm not sure how much we're going to see it. I think it's a really cool card because it exists, right? And so you always have to sort of have it in the back of your mind. Do I really want to go all in on the strategy, knowing Wipe Clean could just wipe me out at any moment if my opponent just happens to be even running one of it, right? Even if they're running one, and you put all your eggs in one basket, and they find it, and they go, oh, boop, basket's empty. And you're like, ow, I lose. Great. So, bottom line, it's going to see some play, but its existence alone will change the metagame a fair amount, I think. I think Trial by Combat might be the best card in the set. Trial by Combat is an incredibly flexible, useful tool. I kind of look at it like Gemhide Basher from set 1. I know we're going way back in the history books here. But in set 1, you would often play Gemhide Basher because you need a card that has aggressive to come in and immediately neutralize that one threat before it gets going. Gemhide Basher has gotten outclassed by the health pool of better creatures as time has gone by. But Trial by Combat kind of fixes this. So as long as you can have something out there with enough attack, you can pretty much kill all their threats. So they play a Wagyu and it has Defender and they grew it a little bit. And you know next turn you're screwed because it's going to get out of control. Well, you can hit it with Trial by Combat. Your opponent's playing one of those incredibly annoying Stasis Warden decks. Bam! Trial by Combat. Brood Queen. Bam! Trial by Combat. Any of these cards that need to live a turn and activate, Trial by Combat can probably neutralize them for you. Okay, so you have that on the one side. On the other side, it's really cool as an activator. You can activate your Thundersaur, you can activate your Alyssa, and so you have all these ways of growing cards that you need to grow. So the reason I feel like Trial by Combat is so amazing is because it fills multiple slots at the same time. So you can run something like a Thundersaur and need removal and just play Trial by Combat as your removal as long as you have cards like Behemoth who are going to be big enough to where Trial by Combat is usually working. Or, of course, once Thundersaur gets going, oh boy, look out. I think one of my favorite combos that I'm definitely going to try with this is Windspark Elemental. It feels like Windspark is going to help you push through so much damage so quickly. Because you can do something like kill a guy across from the guy who you want to attack with Trial by Combat, which does damage to their face. Then you attack them, which does that same amount of damage to their face again. So it's basically like getting to do twice the damage on that turn. So we'll have to see how well Windspark fits in these decks. If you want to go hyper aggro, he might not have a big enough body anyway, but I think I'll definitely be trying him more in a control variant where you're using Trial by Combat as a control piece. So I really like the card. I think we're going to see a ton of it in constructed play, and I think if you were only going to make one card from this set, this would be the one. And it's a heroic, which is great. So go out, make 3, and be happy. I think Shard Plate Graft wins the award for most unnecessary card. It feels like Stoneblade gets in these spots where they're like, what do we give you, Terra? How about another buff they could never use because they have 7,000 buffs already? It's not a bad card. It's just simply there are already tons and tons and tons of buffs, and I don't think this card does anything that's this outstanding or unique or interesting that makes people want to put this in a constructed deck. It is interesting that every turn now you're getting a buff at the start of your turn, but there's plenty other ways to give people continual buffs that are more explosive than this. This is more of like a slow and steady buff rather than something that's more explosive. And I think most people in the constructed queue know that you need the more explosive buff usually if it's only going to be one creature. It's just going to be too slow. That creature will probably die before it gets to fully use something like Shard Plate Graft. So bottom line is it feels unnecessary. It's not a bad card. I'm sure in something like Draft it'll be fine. But in the constructed queue, I don't think we're going to see this card. All right, the last card is Grimgaunt Warrior. And this is an interesting card. I like the fact that it makes you have to think more about lane placement. I feel like sometimes we get away from that with some of the power cards. This card, you really have to be cognizant of where you're playing stuff. Your opponent has to be really thinking about this. The problem is I feel like he just doesn't grow that fast. He's no Doom Rider, the original Doom Rider, that is. You know, if he gets 1 death trigger on that first turn, he's a 6-7. That's pretty good. If he gets 2, then he's an 8-9. That's pretty solid. But then you're having to have that perfect situation, right, where he comes in and both guys next to him die. It's not anywhere on the board. It's just next to him. So then you're really having to have a situational card here. And Solforge situational cards are great, except for if you have to level them up to be good. And playing him under leveled I don't think is going to be all that useful. So that means I would think you would have to build him in a deck where stuff is dying, right? And so then you're able to exploit that. But the problem is, I don't feel like he's enough of a win condition on his own where you can play little piddly stuff that's going to die to grow him like you could with the Doom Rider. I feel like he's not quite strong enough. He doesn't grow quite fast enough. He just feels like he's a card that's kind of interesting and people will build around him. And I think you'll be able to find some decent spots for him. I just don't think he's going to be a dominant card in the constructed metagame. He might see some play, but I don't think we're going to see much beyond the occasional play in the occasional deck. All right, well, that wraps up my set 6.2 set review. Let me know what you thought. Am I dead on or am I dead wrong? I'll see you next time here from Tiny Grimes Games.